is this really prickly and awful? So when it's on the right side, it's going to lean like this, which means that those stitches have to go back. And that's confusing to me. I love this cardigan so much. My mind had a whole moment where I was like, wait, which way is front? Which way is back? What is right? What is left? All of you should knit one. Should I have done the sand cardigan differently? Wow, look at it. There's so much to see here. I'm Nora, and this is also known as Nora Knits. Hello there, I'm Nora, and you're watching, also known as Nora Knits. Thank you so much for joining me for yet another podcast episode today. I am so excited to share my projects with you today because we are so close to being done with at least, well, like only with 2 of them. But definitely one is pretty much ready to go. And I'm really excited because it also means that I am keeping on track so far for my fall knitting plans, and hopefully everything else will fall into place now that that first kind of milestone is coming up and I am meeting it. So today I'm going to be sharing with you 2 of my 4 whips that you have seen before. So we will not be discussing the Tulsa tank or the sand cardigan today. And then I am very excited to be sharing with you a new cast on, which is my first test knit in a while. And so, yeah, I'm so excited to share these things with you today. And with that, I think that we should just go ahead and dive on in. I will go in order today of the projects that have been on the needles the longest and then work my way towards the newer ones. So we will start by talking about my final lingering summer knit, which is the Cordelia skirt by Witchery Design. It is a midi length striped skirt which features this really crisp folded over waistband, and in the contrast stripes that you see, there's one single purl row in each one that really gives this skirt a very store-bought look. It's very chic and kind of beachy looking, but I'm trying to get it done so that I can still wear it a little bit in these fall transitional seasons. And to be honest, I almost feel like I'm going to get more wear out of it in this time of year than I even would in the summer. But when we left off last week, I was talking about wanting to get the actual waistband knitting done. And I did that over the past week. So let me show you where things are at right now. Now I'm knitting this project in Drops Bell in the colorways Mint, Cream, and Black. And actually in every podcast, I get a compliment on this Mint Cream colorway. And I'm really glad that you guys are loving it just as much as I am. My original thought with this was to go for a classic black and white, but after looking through some of the colorways and just some of the other garments I was planning to knit this year, I really felt like practically a long skirt in white wasn't really going to work. And when I came across this mint cream colorway, I just really fell in love with the way that it's a very sort of antique white. It is basically like a beige tone that leans a little bit more green gray. And I think that that's really contributing to the overall just kind of like luxe look of this. Whereas if it was stark white, it would look a little bit cheaper. I guess if I were to sort of equate it for my American viewers, I feel like if I had done this in just black and white, it would be a little bit more of like a Walmart find. And then having done it in the mint cream with the black, it's more of a Target find. So if that means something to you, maybe you'll agree. Now, this skirt is intended to be knit on 4mm needles. However, I knit mine on 3.75mm. And essentially where things are at the moment are that I got down to a length where I started kind of questioning if I was close or done with the actual length of this skirt. and decided to go back, pick up stitches for the waistband, which I knit up on 3mm needles. And that is a folded over waistband. So you knit the height of the waistband, knit a purl row, and then knit that height again. And it is to be sewn down. Now, I've done things a little bit backwards. The pattern is written to start with the waistbands, then move on to the skirt. And I just sort of flip-flop things for ease of making for myself. And I also sort of disregarded the measurements listed in the pattern for the actual waistband and instead went for something that just kind of looked good to my eye, but would also work well with a standard elastic size. So the way that I'm holding it up right here, you could see the full double length of the waistband. There's the purl row where it folds, and that purl row just gives a really natural folding point to this skirt waist. And I went for about 1.5 inches of waistband. So since we spoke, one of the acquisitions that I've made is I picked up my elastic for the waistband. This is a 1.5 inch elastic. It is the non-roll elastic. And the only thing with the non-roll elastic is when it is non-roll, basically, it's not supposed to be able to fold in on itself, which on your waist, a lot of times garments will wind up kind of creasing there, and then you can never get that out. But the only thing with elastic like this is I always feel like it's so hard, it's so sturdy, I kind of need it to break in a little bit. So I might even just give this a few little tugs before I go and actually put this in the waistband. But I actually have yet to even hold this in here and make sure that I got my measurements right. So I do just want to kind of eyeball that super, super quickly. I figured that I wanted the waistband to sit fairly snug around the elastic, but I don't want it tugging at all. And I also didn't want it swimming in there because I thought then that would encourage it to maybe kind of curl inside and I would have issues in that way. So, man, okay, it looks like I literally got the perfect size, which makes sense. I was measuring this as I went to make sure that I could stay with a consistent and standard elastic height. This is the 1.5 inch elastic that's going to go in there. And after thinking about how I personally wanted to sew down the waistband, what I think I'm going to do is probably a 3-needle bind off, if not a crochet hook sort of cast off, where you take, I feel like I just got fibers from the skirt in my throat. Anyway, yes, either a 3-needle binds off or the crochet sort of cast off where you insert your crochet hook onto the live stitches on your left hand needle, go through and draw a loop up through the stitch that you want to secure it to on the inside, and that creates kind of a slip stitch. My only fear with that route, and I've mentioned this before, is that it might not be stretchy enough as you need a waistband to be, as it does have to go up and over the widest parts of my body and then still fit snugly around the smallest part of my body. But also, and this will come up later in my new cast on, I forgot, I've done this once before and I cannot remember when, but it's almost like, it's almost, it's the idea sort of a 3-needle binds off, but instead of having to go in and pick up the stitches where you'd be securing the finished edge down to, you actually just kind of place those stitches on the needle and then knit two together. If I'm not mistaken, that's something that I had done in my Lily Kate France Boulevard bag in the tux. I think that was a similar sort of idea. And I don't know yet how elastic that is, but that seems like it could be another option if I don't want to pick up all stitches for a 3-needle bind off. But anyway, I'm happy to see that the 1.5 inch elastic does fit on there, and I'm glad that I was able to pick that up over the week. So I think that the next steps for this now are going to be to put it onto some try it on tubing and block this. Then, once it's dry, insert the elastic and get this sitting on the waist where it will be sitting in wear so that I can determine how much length it needs. Or are we in a good spot? Or did I already go too far? Because I'm just not sure yet. This is a fairly heavy garment. It's not overwhelmingly heavy, but I do definitely anticipate it's going to drop a little bit and stretch a little bit in blocking and just in wearing. So this seems like the most sensible thing, and I only want to do it with the try-it-on tubing so that I don't have to worry about not having those live stitches after the fact. And that's just then if I were to bind off and then sew things down, it's just not the way that I was planning to go about it. So, yes, those are the next steps for this skirt. Try it on tubing, block it. I I've mentioned before that I've had some people warn me about this particular yarn bleeding, and especially the black into the mint cream colorway. I am actually extremely nervous about that happening, and I've been meaning to go pick up some of those color catchers, and I did go look at them at the store. But all I could find was like a giant pack of them. And I don't know how much use I would actually get out of a whole pack of color catchers. So I'm kind of trying to avoid purchasing those. I know a few people have said that they have used vinegar to soak their garment in, and that is supposed to prevent color bleeding. I'm going to do some more research because I plan to get this blocked in the next couple of days. So I'll be able to, at the very least, report back on how well that did or did not work. But that's kind of where my head is leaning right now. I don't think I mentioned yet, but I did knit this skirt in the size extra large. And as of today, it's been on my needles for 62 days. And I feel like it's so close to coming off of the needles. So, yeah, I think that that's all I have to say about the Cordelia skirt. I will just have thrown in the footage of me trying this on last week so that you could see. At this point, it's just really cumbersome to hold up and get the full scope of, but I think it just looks really fun. And on the note of wearing it more in the fall than I would in the summer, I think that this is going to look fantastic with a pair of black over the knee boots underneath, and then either a big oversized sweater on top or even just a blazer or something. It's making me want a black oversized sweater to pair with this, as well as just other things. I think that's a great staple thing for my wardrobe. But yeah, I actually do think that this could get worn quite a bit in these cooler months. So it's definitely keeping this very exciting, even though it's technically one of my summer knits. So anyway, that is all I have to say about the Cordelia skirt, again by Witchery Design. And as of today, it's been on my needles for 62 days. Next up is the project that oh my gosh, I feel like I just am running out of words to describe how much I love this cardigan and the way in which, if I was feeling any sort of knitting slump, or even more so, maybe a redundancy in my knitting, this took me out of it. And I think that it's reflective in the time that I have been able to accomplish what I have within, as well as just, I think it's funny when I'm going back and editing these videos, I can literally see on my face, I'm like, I love this cardigan so much. And it's just oozing out of me the joy that it has brought me. I could literally get emotional because that is how much I have enjoyed this project. And therefore, I want to just tell you some of my favorite things about it, as well as what I think is maybe a mistake that I caught, but I was able to fix, and some thoughts that I have on the button bands. And okay, I just have a lot to say here. So let's go ahead and introduce the Beatrix Cardigan by Gregoria Fibers. Part of why I love this project so much is because I am using thrifted yarn, which is always something that's just so satisfying to me. I really do love to thrift yarn and find yarn at a great price. I'm a bargain girl at heart, so that definitely does contribute to the overall sort of satisfaction of this project. And the yarn is Lamb's Pride worsted, which is a single ply yarn. It has just a gentle spin to it, and it's a very frothy, airy wool. The colorway is called Chocolate Souffle, and I decided to pair that with Knit Picks Alpaca Cloud lace, and that is a baby alpaca lace weight yarn in the colorway Hamlet. Now, the two with each other, the Chocolate Souffle is a very violet undertoned brown. It has a true dark chocolate nature to it. And the Hamlet has an olive undertone to it. It's a little more golden underneath. And the two together create enough of a difference that it really does help the texture to stand out, I think, on this garment. I know a lot of people would hesitate to knit an all over textured garment out of such a dark colored yarn, but I think that even just having the slight shift in undertone is enough to help make those details stand out, and while still being able to maintain the integrity just of this color, which is a color that I'm simply loving at the moment. So let us get Miss Beatrix on Helena the Hanga. I've got to get her set up a little bit, so hold on. I have a whole slew of sewing projects that I am just waiting for a day where I could bust out the sewing machine and get them all done. And I promise you, on that list is a little cover for this girl. I will tell you right off the bat, this weighs about 1 billion pounds. I have yet to actually weigh it, and I don't know that I will. I'll definitely do it for the next episode. I don't know if I'll have time to get all that together for today, but boy, is this heavy. Okay, I just kind of chucked on a stitch marker to sort of help this stay closed. All right, first things first, I did knit this cardigan in the size 5 on the recommended 5mm needles. And as of today, it's been on the needles for 27 days. And you may be able to tell that it is, in fact, done. The knitting is all done here. I just finished it last night. The only things that we're waiting on are blocking and then button loops and button installation. But all of the knitting is complete. And so I have a lot to say here. When we spoke last week, I believe that I had just finished my second sleeve, if I was not halfway through with it, and I had the remaining waistband to knit up. This project is a saddle shoulder cardigan, and you start with the saddle shoulders. From there, you pick up stitches along the back edge of that saddle shoulder and work your way down the back to the underarm. Same deal on the fronts. And then everything is worked to the length that you desire with some 1x1 ribbing at the bottom. And then when you go back and pick up the stitches for the sleeves, you reincorporate the cable that makes up the saddle shoulder so that that feature actually runs the entire length of the cardigan from neck to wrist. And then finish off with the 1x1 rib again. Now, I do like to do things just a little bit out of order, and that's just a habit that I have developed over time with my knitting. So the way that I did things was starting out the same, but then when I got to a length where I thought it was a good time to start the ribbing, that's when I went back and did the sleeves so that I could knit up the length of the sleeves and have a more substantial piece to try on. Before actually determining that the length was right or not right, I was very happy to find out when I did try it on that I was comfortable with the amount of ribbing that I planned to match the sleeves. And then this is all finished off with then the button bands as well as the collar. So one quick thing about the 1x1 rib on the cuffs and the hem. There is a measurement listed in the pattern. I think I did just a little bit more than what was in there. Other than that, though, I truly did not modify this pattern except for the one thing that I think was an error in the pattern that I'm going to tell you about in a minute. But overall, I did not modify this piece whatsoever, except for the length and the ribbing a little bit. But that goes person to person. That was just to increase the length of the sweater and the sleeves and everything. So when I had knit the cuffs on this, I counted that I did 15 rows of 1x1 rib, then 2 setup rows. So a knit one, slip one to set up for the Italian tubular sewn bind off, which I did on both cuffs, and those are knit in the round. And then assumed that I would like things best if the hem on the sweater and this kind of waistband ribbing, I would like it the most if those would kind of coordinate with each other. However, the body is knit, of course, flat as it is a cardigan. And so when it came to trying to hit that 15 rows of 1x1 rib, I realized that it was going to leave me on a wrong side row, right side row, right? So I would have knit a right side row last, then I'd do a setup row, that'd be a wrong side row, a setup row, that'd be a right side row, and then I would have been binding off from the back of the fabric. And I don't know if that's like, if that would create a different look or not, but I figured I better not risk it. And so actually the hem has 16 rows of ribbing. I figured one more was better than one less in the hem for really no reason whatsoever. That just seems like a good call to me. And then I did the sewn bind off there. So I just figured I would make that note. If you are like me and like to sort of bounce around on your project and you are knitting a cardigan where you have your sleeves in the round, body flat, and you want all of it to match up, I would just recommend choosing an even number of rows. So there you go. Now, the next thing was to come back and pick up stitches for the button band. And the button band is made up of what I call unicorn cables because they look like unicorn horns to me, that just 2x2 cable that spirals around itself. And then a few little border stitches as well. Now, couple things with that. So when I went to pick up stitches, I knew that because my ribbing was a little bit longer than the pattern had intended, that the number that she told me to pick up in the pattern was iffy, and I wouldn't really find out until I got to the end. So I followed the pickup rate. And essentially, I wound up kind of in between the two sizes, so the size 5 and the size 6. The number that I picked up following the pickup rate landed kind of right in between those two. And because it's a cabled button band, and one of them starts from the bottom up and the other starts from the top down, I did not feel comfortable or confident changing the pickup number from at least one of the sizes in the pattern so that I could guarantee in the end mine were symmetrical. Now, I also figured that because I knew mine was a little bit longer, I should just shoot for more stitches rather than less. And so I took it out and picked up the stitches for the size 6 of this cardigan. And I feel like I maybe should have gone the other way. We'll see in blocking. But I feel right now like it's looking a little wavy wobbly, and as though I could have done with fewer stitches rather than too many. But it's really not something I'm going to know for sure until it is fully blocked. A little bit of a bummer. Now, On the topic of button bands, I have knit how many cardigans now? 3. I'm working on 1, 4. So a good handful of cardigans. And I never had an issue with button bands, double knit button bands, ribbed button bands. None of these things really fazed me. I've never loved picking up stitches for a button band because typically you're picking up from one hem up and around the neck and then down to the other. And it's a lot of stitches. And what's actually the most frustrating part about that to me is if you go through and pick up all of those stitches and then get to the end and find out that your stitch count was off and you picked up too many stitches or not enough stitches, and now you have to go back all the way to the beginning. Or, like in this case, you go through and pick up however many stitches you do, then knit the button band and feel like the tension's a little funny because you picked up too many or too few. And to resolve the issue, you have to undo everything and start over. And that's why when knitting my sand cardigan, which is the whip that we're not really discussing today, that is an ankle length cardigan. And the idea of picking up stitches from ankle up to the back of the neck, down to the next ankle, had I done that and then got halfway through knitting the button band and realized that my stitch count was off and the tension was all wrong, and if I had to then pull back all the way from the neck back down to the ankle and re-pick up all of those stitches, that seems like a nightmare to me. And that was when I made the decision to figure out how to pick up stitches as you go. And I made a whole tutorial video on that. I'll link it down below if you're ever curious to see that. Now, the issue with that is that button band is taking me just about as much time to knit as the rest of the whole sweater cardigan did. And then this button band, it's a little bit different because it's not from hem to the back of the neck down to the hem. It's actually just these front, like sort of lapel sections. And so you are working with a way more tangible amount of stitches. And if things are wrong, it doesn't feel like so much of a loss if you had to start over. And this really flew by. But part of that was also the effect of having picked up all of your stitches rather than picking them up as you go. This is a really big epiphany that I had that I almost wondered, should I have done the sand cardigan differently? It's the equivalent of sort of like writing down a checklist when you start your day and then working through the day and crossing off things from your checklist and seeing that dwindle down and that satisfaction of knowing that you're accomplishing something with every task versus just having a mental list of what you have to do through the day and going through and trying to get it all done and not knowing what you've accomplished or what you haven't. That is the difference between picking up all of your stitches and then knitting your button bands and then picking up as you go. Now, I think that idea of being able to see and sort of cross off, the stitches from what you've picked up, there's such a tangible number then of stitches that are left to pick up, which creates that sort of one more row effect. And there is something to be said about that. And while that popcorn style of knitting, of just one more, it's so beneficial in the working aspect. I can't help but feel like right now, the tension on this, I would not have had the issue that I think I might have had it been a pick up as you go situation. So I just wanted to present that as, again, that was just like an epiphany that I had of why am I banging out this button band, but the sand cardigan button band is taking so incredibly long. And I think that that's why, but there is a trade-off there and there's pros and cons to each way. And so I think if you have a project where you're deciding how you're going to approach it, just keep those things in mind. So that's something that I wanted to mention. Like I said, though, I won't really know until this is done and blocked because I am hoping that I can kind of fudge things a little bit and make everything make a little bit more sense, but I'm not really sure yet. The other thing is that the button band and the cuffs and the hem and the collar, they're all knit on a 4 millimeter needle, which really is pushing it for the yarn thickness that I have been working with on this cardigan. And I will even say that knitting the button band here was a little bit cumbersome on my hands. It was not the greatest experience for my hands, but it did go by so quickly. So something about that. But that's also part of why I feel like the button band is feeling just super, super dense as compared to the rest of the fabric. Now, I also anticipate that the rest of the fabric is going to stretch out a bit and relax quite a bit more in blocking, whereas because the button band is so dense, it's really not going to do that so much. So in a perfect world, that's all going to balance out in the end. But I did just want to mention that, especially if you are seeing that here. The other thing is that you pick up your stitches and then on the right side, you do an Italian cast on. That always takes me a few tries till I get my tension just right on an Italian cast on. But when you're only working with 10 or so stitches, that's not the end of the world. So I had done that and then worked my way up. That's how this side is worked. And then for this side, you're doing a standard cast on up here and then working your way down. And I had just a little bit of this bummer moment where I felt like I did pick up a stitch too close to the bottom of the hem of the sweater because you do finish it off with that Italian sewn bind off, which sort of creates the look of one more row at the bottom. And so right now it is kind of doing the thing where the button band ends like a half an inch after the actual hem of the sweater. Again, maybe that will be resolved in blocking. I am so hoping it will be, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. So those were the main points that I wanted to make with the button band. Now, the button band was also where I think I caught a mistake. Essentially, if you've never knit cables before, and if you have, there are two different types of cables. Different designers call them different things. It's usually something along the lines of a left cable cross and a right cable cross. Some people will refer to it as just a front or back cable. I've seen a few different ways. I do prefer when it is just called a front or back because that literally tells you where to hold your stitches while you knit across. And it's much easier for my brain than thinking like, okay, so when it's on the right side, it's going to lean like this, which means that those stitches have to go back. And that's confusing to me. But in the photos of this cardigan, the unicorn horns both appear to be twisting out and therefore creating like a V down the button band. But according to the instructions in the pattern and the definitions, more importantly, of the right and left cable cross, it was actually going to be that they were both turning the same way. I went to Ravelry and checked the designer's photos as well as everyone else's photos, and I caught a couple of people seem like they did follow the pattern and what it says and wound up with those cables both turning the same way. I noticed it straight off the bat. I went back and looked at the photo because I decided that even if the pattern wanted both of those cables to be turning the same way, I didn't. So I don't know if this is just a situation where I was struggling to read what it was saying or if there really is an error either in the written pattern or in the definition of that cable. So whatever it was, I chose to disregard the direction that the cables said to go in the pattern and chose to knit them both so that they're turning out. Now that's a little confusing because you do knit one going up and then you knit the other coming down. And so my mind had a whole moment where I was like, wait, which way is front? Which way is back? What is right? What is left? But in the end, I got the result that I wanted. I also chose to knit the button band and the button band cables without a cable needle. I was just telling you guys how much I love my little cable needle hook, and I really do love that thing. And it's really great when you're pulling it out for every few rows and you have all this space between the rows. Whereas with the button band, it was like every 3 rows you were cabling. And those rows are only 10 or so stitches wide. So it's moving very quickly, and it felt like a lot of up and down for the cable needle. So I chose to knit mine without a cable needle. And it's something that, for me, I think is only applicable when it's a 2-stitch cable, so 1/1. I don't know if that would be a 1-stitch cable or a 2-stitch. Let's call that a 1-stitch cable. A 2-stitch cable, so 2 stitches over 2 stitches. I would probably even just draw the line there. Maybe a 3-stitch cable if the situation really called for it. But more specifically in these small sections, if I had to cross over the 2 stitches at the end of each row, say, there would still be so much time in between that to just pull out the cable needle would not be a big deal. But because here it was like cable, 2 minutes later, cable, 2 minutes later, cable, that would have been a lot of up and down. So by doing it without a cable needle, I've seen, again, a few different ways of doing this. I know I did it a little bit differently when I had done a 1/1 stitch cable. In this particular circumstance, the way that I did it was that I approached where the pattern said to put your stitches on a cable needle. So let's just say it was instructing me to put the 2 stitches behind the fabric. What I would do is reach my right hand needle past those 2 stitches and insert it purlwise on the 2 stitches that would inevitably wind up crossing over. While everything is still on a needle, I would pinch the fabric so that the 2 stitches that were supposed to have gone on the cable needle, I'm really just pinching them kind of in thin air, kind of up against the needle so that they don't unravel as I pull all 4 stitches off of the left-hand needle. In doing that, you're left with 2 free-floating stitches, the 2 that were supposed to have been on a cable needle, as well as 2 stitches on the tip of your right-hand needle. Then all 4 stitches go back onto the left-hand needle with those free floaters first because they were supposed to be held behind the fabric. They go first, then the 2 stitches that you had slipped onto the right-hand needle, and then you just knit across all 4. Likewise, if it was a situation where those stitches were supposed to come forward, you would put your right-hand needle through the second set of 2 stitches, but you would insert your needle from the back of your work. So you'd bypass the first 2 stitches, move the needle into the 3rd and 4th stitch, again, purlwise. You pinch and clamp everything with your hand, with your fingers, and then all 4 stitches come off the needle. So now you have 2 stitches that are free floating in front, and then 2 stitches that are on your needle in the back. And then all 4 stitches go back onto the left hand needle, starting with the 2 free floaters. So now they're crossing over the front. And then the other 2 stitches have been crossed over the back, and they all go back onto your left hand needle, and you just knit across them again. I will try to link a video below that I had followed that was helpful, but it's just another one of those things that I would love to demystify, because if you've heard about knitting cabling without a cable needle, it does sound really scary. I agree. That's why, again, I really wouldn't do it for more than 2-3 stitches tops. And even still, it's only with the right yarn, the right circumstances, the right tension. All the other variables have to be right. If your yarn is particularly slippery, then I feel like the risk of losing stitches is a little high. And I know personally that would just stress me out more than it would be helpful. So yes, now this yarn, it doesn't want to go anywhere. It's very sticky, rustic yarn. And so I didn't have an issue doing it there, but just so you know, that was how I had knit the button band. Now, once those front columns were done, that's when you go back and pick up for the collar. I followed the pattern to a T at that point and knit up the amount of rows that she told me to, set up rows, and then sew an Italian tubular bind off. And she's done. Ish. Like I said, what I have remaining to do is blocking, which will be the very first thing that happens as soon as we finish up here today. This girl's heading in for a bath. And once she is dry, that is when I will assess and address all of the buttons and the button loops. I don't think that I've yet said what buttons I'm leaning towards for this one, but it's a set of buttons that I thought would be allocated to a different project. Honestly, at this point, I have them on my mind for 3 different projects. And so I think I might just need to find like a bulk order of these buttons. But there's some that I had purchased from a little while back, the local yarn shop going out of business, and they're just little antique brass metal buttons. I think that they're going to look really great on here. I'm not 100% sure. I'm like 90% sure that that's what's going on here, but I have yet to dig them out and make sure that they're the right size and everything, but something along those lines, something that's going to add a little metal to just kind of take it from looking so rustic and homemade. I want it to push it a little bit more chic metal because I want this to be a little more of a jacket, and something that is going to be enough contrast that you see that it is a button, but still blend in enough that this can be the most optimized in my wardrobe as far as just like, I don't want like a bright red button on here and then minimize the amount of things I could wear it with. I want this to be a very wearable piece. With all that being said, I think I should just throw this on real quick. I am going to, after I film, take the before blocking shots of this. So I think that you'll be seeing them at some point now. And at that point, I may or may not even just secure the front again with some stitch markers. But I wanted to just talk about 2 more things with this project. Like I said, I'm just really excited about it. So I just want to share all my thoughts with you because I think that you should knit this. I think all of you should knit one. That's how passionately I feel about it. Okay, so I think that this is going to be one of the biggest differences we will see all year with before and after blocking, and that is just the nature of cables and texture in general. But this yarn in particular just really does need to kind of soak to come into its own. As of right now, the way that things are fitting, I am surprised a little bit by how much positive ease I'm getting at this point in the body versus the positive ease that I'm getting in the sleeves. I I find that just fascinating that at this point in the game, there's such a stark contrast between the two. I don't know if I am thrilled about it or not yet, and I don't think I'll ever be able to know until it's blocked. It's just an observation that I've made so far. Now, last night when I had finished this, I just tried it on with a tank top underneath, and I'm not a particularly sensitive person, but I will say that after just having it on for a couple of minutes, I did notice I was getting just a little redness here, and I don't know if that's something that's going to change with blocking. I don't think that it's itchy. Actually, I never thought that it was itchy the whole time I was making it. And then just last night, I was like, is this really prickly and awful? Jury is out. I don't think it is. So I don't know if it was all just based off of my swatch, which was much softer, or what, if it was just in abundance, or maybe because I've been whipping this around all over the place, the fibers maybe have just kind of really been flustered a little bit, and thus they're flustering me a little bit. But that's something I'm looking out for in blocking. And then the only other thing that I thought was interesting is that this is my first time knitting a round collared cardigan. And I'm really curious to see how I like styling this. At the moment, I think that the height on that is really nice. And I'm hoping that it's just something that integrates well into my wardrobe. But so far, I've only had a V-neck cardigan that I've worn. And that was also why I leaned into the jacket vibes of this one, because I do see a world in which this is primarily reserved for wearing either fully buttoned up or not buttoned up at all, just because of the round neck. And then the buttons, from what I've seen in the photos, there are button loops that go around the buttons, and they're going to almost appear like they're free floating kind of in the middle. So in the photos, even you can see that she has kind of some skin and some space showing in between the two button plackets. And so that's something that will be interesting to see how that winds up just being, wearability wise in the end. But yeah, right now, even with those little just kind of things that I'm like, oh, I hope that works out. Even if nothing changed, I would still love this. If nothing else, for the process that it was to knit. An absolute joy to knit this. I will give my actual final thoughts next week when this is done and blocked. And at that point, I will have the final yarn quantities and just all of that extra jazz for you. But as of right now, I'm thinking that this is one of my favorite things I've ever made, and officially it will be done to wear to Rhinebeck, which this is actually the last podcast going up before Rhinebeck weekend, which is crazy to me. So that was my goal deadline for this guy, and I'm so excited that I'm going to be meeting that deadline. So I will be wearing this at Rhinebeck, and I could not be more excited about it. So yes. That is the Beatrix cardigan by Gregoria Fibers. It's been on the needles for 27 days. It's officially off the needles, but it is not officially a finished object. And as of right now, I just adore it. In fact, it's freezing in here and I kind of don't want to take it off. But I will. Man, that thing is just so warm and cozy. Okay, now we finally have a new cast on. This is a test knit sweater that I am making. It is by Emma's Knits, Emma Mayer, and quickly growing as one of my favorite designers out there. So I'm so excited to be participating in this test knit. I literally cast this on last night. And I haven't gotten very far, but I will show you the progress that I've made anyway. This is called the Artemisia sweater, and it is an all over Boucle yarn. I'm knitting mine out of Mohair by Canard Boucle. And then I actually had to do a little shopping for the yarn for the collar and the cuffs on this guy. So I will share with you what I picked up for those as well. Wow, look at it. There's so much to see here. Yeah, so I did just start this. And actually, to be honest, the amount of time that I have worked on this, I'm pretty pleased with what I've accomplished. So this is a raglan style sweater, which is fantastic because of all sweater constructions, a raglan is, I would say arguably like the more simple, right? And it's not my favorite look, if I'm honest, but the boucle texture that makes up the body of this sweater is going to hide the majority of like those details. So I like that we've gone simple in construction, but the look of a very complex sweater. My boucle, it's in the colorway chestnut, and essentially the yarn that I was supposed to have done the cuffs and collar with, I screwed up my order and didn't order it by accident. And so I had to scramble to find something that would work. Now, if I'm being really honest with myself, I don't know that I'm 100% sold on the results that I'm getting with the yarn that I chose. And it's no one's fault but my own. Apparently, yarns in this colorway are not easy to find, which I'm glad then that I picked up this colorway for the body of the sweater. But I do wish that the yarn I was using for the cuffs, for the collar, was a little closer matching. In fact, even the yarn from the Mohair by Canard website was not going to match the body of this sweater. So I guess I can't be too mad about it. But I really did think that it would be a lot easier to find something in this warm brown in the weight and everything that I needed. Whatever. I could not find it. And the closest that I could get was a yarn that I found on sale at a local yarn shop. It's called Baby Wool Dalegarn. It's 100% wool. And that's this color that you see. So the warm brown here, it's a very rich reddish undertone. And then this brown, it's a similar level. So the shade and the depth of color is pretty similar, but it's definitely a cooler, pinkier, mauvier sort of undertone. And then that is even more enhanced by the fact that I paired it with some leftover soft silk mohair from Knitting for Olive. This is the colorway Brown Nougat. This is yarn that I had left over from my Azucena pullover sweater. I never remember what that one's called. By Claudia Quintanilla from Unit Toronto. And I thought that maybe this combination would kind of mask itself. And it's turned into a little bit more of a marled situation than I would have preferred. However, the sweater starts with the collar. And so I had to just make a choice and go with something that I could get my hands on ASAP and get this started because it is a test knit. There is a deadline and we just had to get going on it. Again, I'm not mad at the color that I'm getting here, but I think if I had more time to just mull it over, I would probably wind up with something a little bit different. And who knows, maybe we will be surprised in the end and I will totally love it. I'm just not 100% sold right now. What I am 100% sold on right now is this Boucle yarn because boy is she soft and delightful to work with. Now, because this is a test knit, I'm not going to go so in depth about all of the little things other than I just want to kind of mention how so far I've really enjoyed the construction of starting with the neckband. Now, this is what I was referring to with the sort of folded over collar that is sewn down by kind of just placing your pickup stitches on the needle and then knitting two together. And it makes for such a very simple and there's not a lot of fuss because you don't need an extra needle. You don't need an extra tool. You just use the needles that you have on there. So that is a really nice feature. And it's also nice that it's just done as you then continue into the rest of the body of the sweater, because how many times have you knitted a folded over collar where you're supposed to then sew that down at the end? And it's like, oh gosh, do I really want to go back and sew this collar down right now? So it's nice that what you see here, this is the finished product and it does look so good. So from here on out, we're going to just disregard the color when talking about this sweater because that is no one's fault but my own. And as of right now, I am just chugging along. I made it through the short row shaping that is in this pattern, and that was lickety split, easy breezy, and I just did my first row of standard raglan, and I can already tell that this is going to be a tough one to put down because it grows pretty quickly. This is a matter of knitting last night and this morning a little bit, and there's a folded over collar in there, so there really is quite a bit of knitting, even though this doesn't look like too much at the moment. And I forgot where the rest of my train of thought was going there, but really enjoying the process so far. The one thing that I wanted to remain very conscious of while I was knitting with the Boucle was any sort of tips, tricks, advice that I could, what's the word I'm looking for? Cultivate while I'm knitting on this to share with you. And as of right now, let's start by saying that Boucle yarn is insanely forgiving to knit with. And so while it may create more challenges, only in the way of you have to be so careful to not add extra stitches or drop stitches by knitting loops or pushing a loop off the needle that you thought was just a boucle loop and it turned out to be an actual stitch. That does create a little bit more, you have to be a little bit more conscientious, conscientious, conscience, con, ooh, aware of what you are doing while you're knitting on the boucle. But the the fabric is so textured and there's so much going on in that fabric on its own that when you do make a little mistake, it's not the end of the world. In fact, I knit one of the increases, maybe two of the increases on the back the wrong way, and I know I created some big holes when I had done it. And now I'm not seeing them at, okay, here's one. A big hole that I made. Almost impossible to see in the boucle when I'm not actually shoving my finger through there, and I'll just go back and duplicate stitch over that later because that was just a mistake I had made, that I realized a little bit later when it was too late. So the one thing that I figured out so far when it comes to knitting with boucle yarn is this is being knit up on 5mm needles, which is a US 8, a really nice chunky needle for the boucle. And I think that's already a tip in itself, is that the bigger the needle you use, the less of a chance you have of knitting through a little boucle loop, because your needle will catch that and you'll notice that it's too snug. In the same vein, what I've been doing is as I'm knitting, please ignore that my nails are not done, but as I'm knitting, I'm, instead of just catching a stitch on the very tip of my needle and then knitting that over, I've been really trying to kind of like shove my needle all the way through the stitch and then knit it. And what I found that that is doing is it's sort of preventing me from just grabbing a little loop and knitting that, where you could do that if you were just at the tip of the needle. So it's really about pulling that stitch all the way down on the right hand needle and working it that way. The other thing is that as I'm knitting, I can kind of feel when I've caught a loop on my right hand needle, and then I'll just stop and I kind of give my right hand needle a little wiggle to separate the loops from the core of the yarn itself. And in doing this, I don't think that this would be a totally knit in the dark, knit without looking type project, but it certainly does make it a little bit more, I can kind of tell without looking when I'm grabbing a loop and when I'm not, and I know when to look down at the very least. Obviously, the only thing that changes with that is your tension. And so you just want to make sure that you're doing that in the swatch, which I figured all of this out with my swatch. Yes, I figured it all out. So that's what I have to say about this so far. Right now, I still have this on the original cable size that I cast on in, and so it's a little bit scrunched up. That's probably actually going to be my other tip for working with the boucle, is to have it as big a cable as you can kind of accommodate with your project without it being too big, but that way there's plenty of room for your stitches to stretch out and there's going to be less of them clumping together and grabbing onto each other, and so less likely for you to knit two together thinking it's a loop and a stitch, and it'll avoid some issues. Right now, I'm just really loving this mohair. It's like so soft and so fluffy, and I'm very excited to have it. So just cast this on last night. That was my acquisition using a little bit of stash yarn. I've never heard of this yarn, and it was in the sale section, just kind of with this floppy tag on it. I got 2 little balls of it. I believe I paid $9 and change for the 2 balls of yarn, so I thought that was pretty fair. And yeah, we'll just have to see how that goes. So yes, that is the Artemisia sweater by Emma Mayer. Definitely go check out Emma's other patterns because this one's not out yet. I will most definitely keep you posted as to when it will be, but I promise you that you're going to be seeing more of her on my channel because I'm loving her patterns. She just posted about a new design that I was like, oh gosh, I don't need another thing to cast on, but I love it. So those are the projects. we're going to ignore the elephants in the room, the projects that weren't talked about today. You will forgive me. It's been crazy busy. We're coming to the end of my work season, and so it's a little chaotic right now, but super excited about the projects that I do have on my needles. And I'm very excited that, like I said, Rhinebeck is coming up. It's the weekend of the 19th, and I will be there. I'm so looking forward to it. I have a little mental shopping list that I am hoping to pick up. I'm looking forward to meeting people and just giving it my best shot again. If you haven't been to Rhinebeck, the New York Sheep and Wool Festival, if you've been, you haven't been, you're going, you're not going, and you're interested in Rhinebeck content, I did a little Rhinebeck tour last year when I had gone, and then I have a podcast episode where I really went in depth about my real honest takeaway from the experience. And so I will definitely put that up here on the screen, however that happens. And I'm eager to see how this year's experience differs from last year with the knowledge that I have now and just the way that I'm going to approach it a little bit differently. So if you're going to Rhinebeck, let me know. Definitely let me know. I hope to see you there. Please feel free to say hey. And otherwise, of course, there will be a podcast episode out on next Saturday. It's just that will be the weekend of Rhinebeck already. So anyone who's going will probably not be watching that on Saturday morning. So that is all I have for you today. I had fun filming. I hope you had fun hanging out with me. If you did, I would so appreciate it if you would give this video a thumbs up. If you subscribe and you ring the bell, you're going to be notified anytime I post a new video. However, you can always count on there being a Saturday morning podcast video at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time. On Saturdays, did I say that? And yeah, that's all I've got for you today. With all of that being said, a big ol' thanks for watching, and I will catch you on the next one. All right, you guys. Bye.